This is the Voice of Russia. The London Bureau of the Voice of Russia is now live on digital radio and online, with news, comment and debate on weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m.
Listening to the Voice of Russia in London. I'm Alice Lagnado. Thousands of churches have been built in Russia over the centuries, often made of wood, with not one nail used in their construction. Many have been destroyed, but large numbers are still standing, mainly in the sparsely populated areas of Russia's northwest, in the Leningrad, Vologda, Murmansk and Archangel regions, and in the Republic of Karelia. Richard Davies is a photographer who spent 9 years travelling across northern Russia documenting these beautiful churches. Together with writer Matilda Moreton, he has produced a book which is packed full of photographs of tiny churches in villages most Russians haven't heard of, along with the many stories that surround each church. I began by asking Richard whether he has a long-standing connection with Russia that got him started on his 9-year journey.
I don't have a particular connection. I'm just a Russophile. And people ask me why I'm so fond of Russia. And I put it down to my mother buying a record of Mendelssohn's violin concerto when I was probably about 13 or 14. And on the other side, there was a violin concerto by Prokofiev. And it was rather sad because while my friends were headbanging to the Rolling Stones, I was headbanging to Prokofiev. That didn't get me to the churches, but it gave me a great love of Russia. And I travelled in Russia. I visited Russia during the Soviet period. But of course, if you'd read a novel by Turgenev or Tolstoy, you wanted to go off into the countryside. And that was one thing that you couldn't possibly do at that stage. So with the breakup of the Soviet Union, I think in many ways I was looking for an opportunity to travel in the countryside. So in I think 2002 I came across these wonderful postcards of Russian wooden churches, which were images by Bilibin, and I suddenly found that I'd found my subject. So I had friends in St. Petersburg, and they tracked down a friend of theirs who would drive for me. And that's really how it started. He happened to be a professor of astrophysics at the university, but he did a bit of driving on the side.
It's a big project to undertake. Did you do it out of love, or was...
I did it out of love. To a certain extent, the churches obviously became more and more important to me, but the thing that I really enjoyed was the travelling, the fact that I was going to places that you would never even think of going to for any other reason than that there might be a church at the end of the...
Like where, for example?
I suppose the most out-of-the-way place I went to was Mizhen. There's a wonderful church there.
Where's that?
Mizhen is east of Archangel, and so you fly to Archangel, and then you fly further east to Mizhen, and you land at an airport that seems to be run by a dog. And then we were very lucky. We landed at the airport. All the buses to the town disappeared, but luckily there was one man with a jeep who took us to the church I wanted to go to, which was a place called Kimja.
Is that a village? Or?
Yes, it's a village on the river Mizhen. Beautiful village, but rather tragically, that church no longer exists. It's a wonderful church. It was being restored. They take it down log by log and then number the logs, and they replace the rotten logs with new logs. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and they did that. And what happened was that they took the church down, and then very sadly the money disappeared, and the logs, I've been told by friends in Russia, have been left to rot. So this very, very beautiful church, which is one of the most beautiful churches, in fact, in the book, is no longer there. Hopefully it will go up again, but I don't know.
But you came across some more joyful stories as well, didn't you, of people working away to restore churches.
Yes. When I first went around, there seemed to be, which was probably about 10 years ago, there was nobody really interested in the churches. But since then, lots of people have been getting in touch with me through my website and telling me about churches that they're working on.
Lots of Russians.
Lots of Russians, yeah. A lot of young people, in fact, older people as well, who've are beginning to re-inhabit their churches. And things are beginning to happen. But even so, a lot more does need to happen if any of these churches are going to survive. Milchik, who very famous expert on Russian architecture who wrote the afterword to my book, said that he thinks that we might in fact be the last generation who can enjoy these churches unless really big efforts are made to restore them.
You went very far in Russia, far north, to places that a lot of foreigners don't go to, that plenty of Russians, I'm sure, haven't been to. Did you feel you got an insight into village life?
Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, people were very, very friendly. But in fact, what was quite interesting is that they sometimes took a little bit of time to accept you. There was one particular place, Podporozhye, another very beautiful church, which is also in a pretty dire condition. But a few years ago, I went there with my Russian driver.
And where's
friend.
that?
Podporozhye is near Onega. It's on the Onega River. And it's a magnificent church which stands out on the horizon. You on the other side of the river, and I've been there twice. I've been there 3 times, in fact. But the first time was in the winter, and you had to walk across the river to get there. And the first time I went with my Russian driver, and there was a man and a wife living in the village, and we asked him if he had the key to the church, and he said no, he didn't have the key to the church, and that was it. A couple of years later, I went with Matilda Moreton, who joined me for the last 5 years of the trip, and she speaks Russian, and she asked Benjamin the same question, do you have the key? And he said, no, there's no key. But she just kept talking and asked him lots of questions about life in the village and this, that and the other. And at one moment he just got up on his chair and reached to the top of his kitchen cupboard and came down with a little tin that had the key to the church in. So he was sussing us out before he decided to let us into the church. And then he did let us into the church, and it was fantastic.
What was in there? Were there any particularly beautiful icons? Was it the wooden construction?
It was rather extraordinary. Again, it was in the winter. It was actually colder inside the church than outside. And the wonderful thing about the church is that there is a sky ceiling that still exists. With most of the wooden churches, the icons were stripped out during Soviet times and have disappeared. So they're rather stark, bare, although beautiful interiors. But every so often you come across a church that still has its sky ceiling.
What's a sky ceiling?
A sky ceiling is it's the roof over the nave of the church. It's usually sort of 12 segments, but it can be 8 or 16 or whatever. But it generally has Christ in the centre, and then on the sections splaying out from the centre, there are images of the apostles or the various archangels or angels or whatever. But it's a wonderfully sort of decorative feature of the church.
Did you meet many local priests who were...
A lot of the churches were not working churches, in fact. We only came across one church that was working, and that was at a place called Oshevensk, near Kargopol.
Where's that?
Kargopol is in the middle of nowhere. It's at the bottom of the Onega River, actually. Onega, the town, is at the top on the White Sea, and Kargopol is at the other end of the Onega River, where it comes out of a particular lake, the name of which I can't remember. But we were very lucky to be there at Easter, and that was the only place, in fact, where we did see a service. We were there for the Easter service. We were there at midnight when they trailed round the church. Did
you stay all night for the whole Easter service?
Didn't stay all night, I'm afraid, but we stayed a good time. But again, what was very nice was that we were staying in a house in the village, and the next morning we woke to a wonderful sort of Easter breakfast, which was full of wonderful, wonderful things, actually. It was fantastic. That was a real...
Painted eggs and kulich, the Easter cake.
Exactly. And there was a little bit of vodka as well. It was a good way to start the day.
So that was one of the few churches where you saw that people were attending. Did you talk to many priests who were trying to get people back into the churches?
Well, we didn't come across that many priests. On one of the last trips that we did, we went to the White Sea, and we went to a place called Borzagori, which is in fact a very beautiful church. That again is just very near Onega, the other side of the river, but on the White Sea. And there's a priest from Moscow, whose name I'm afraid I can't remember, who with his wife is restoring the church for the local community. In fact, there are two churches there, and one of them he's restoring. The other one is still kitted out like a Soviet club with a stage, and it's the village disco.
Did anyone else talk to you about getting people back to church or people returning to the churches? Did you get a feel for whether Russians were starting to go back to church more nowadays, or were you more working in abandoned churches that weren't really working churches anyway?
Well, even the abandoned churches had been re-inhabited by, new cardboard icons, usually wrapped up in plastic bags. But there weren't, to protect them. But there was no real feeling that there was any great activity. I mean, at some of the churches, they'd say that a local priest would come from a nearby town or village on the Saints' Day and hold a service. So there might be a service held once a year. In another place, Terchazovo, which is also on the Onega River, a local lady says prayers in the church every day and is encouraging the young people to respect their church.
I guess the villages are pretty quiet anyway, and it may be about that as well as...
Yes, well, some of the churches, in fact, are in the middle of nowhere. The villages that were their congregation have disappeared. As you know, during Soviet times, a lot of villages were closed down, and the inhabitants would go to the local town. So some of the churches are just stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a field. During Soviet times, they were looked after. A lot of them have little metal plaques on them saying that they're historic monuments and that they're under the protection of the state. But since the breakup of the Soviet Union, the plaques have become more and more rusty, and less time has been spent to look after them.
Did you get a feeling for the difficulties, the harshness of village life?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the villages are very depopulated, and the people that are left are old people, generally, or young people who are trying to make a go of it, but generally old people, and I think they do find things very difficult. Yeah.
Very tough life.
Very tough life. Yeah. No, we had some extraordinary stories.
What are you hoping? I mean, your book's fantastic as it stands alone. Are you also hoping that perhaps it'll help encourage more interest in reviving and restoring these fantastic churches?
Yes, I actually published the book myself. The publisher that I was going to publish it came back with some dreadful layouts, and I wasn't very pleased with it. And as they left, as we parted company, they said, "Richard, you must remember, we're producing a book for people who love wooden churches." And I said, "We're not. We're producing a book for people who don't even know they love wooden churches." And this, of course, is what I've found. People have come up to me who I work with a lot of architects, and they've been amazed by these buildings, and other people have been amazed by these buildings. At the book launch recently, the wife of a friend came up to me, and she said that her husband had been telling me that you were photographing wooden churches, and I didn't understand what that was about. But now I've seen the book, I do know what it's about, and I love these wooden churches. And so that's part of the remit of the book, to make people aware of these extraordinary buildings and try and wake up the people who will be able to save them, to do that. And of course, it doesn't take a lot of money. My little speech contains the fact that for the price of a centre forward for Chelsea, you could probably restore most of the churches in northern Russia.
The price of one footballer.
Well, he'd be a pretty good footballer, at the centre forward, the goal scorer. Drogba, maybe.
Just to get an idea of the scale, how many churches are we talking about? I'm trying to just get an idea. We're talking about thousands, aren't we?
Well, there used to be thousands. We're now talking about hundreds.
That was Richard Davies talking to me, Alice Lagnado, about his book Wooden Churches, Travelling in the Russian North. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Alice Lagnado. Stay with us.